welcome to Cellular Healing TV. This is episode number 106, and Dr. Pompa and I have some very special guests with us today. We have Phil Kaplan, who is no stranger to Cellular Healing TV, and he's going to be joining the show to share his personal mold remediation story. And to further kind of explain the story, we have Kevin Sutherland on the call, who is Phil's mold remediation specialist, who actually worked with Phil to remediate the mold from his home. So we have Dr. Pompa here, of course. So welcome everyone to the show.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Don't mind, Dr. Pompa.
Go ahead.
Because my story is not that important here. What's important is that I finally found the guy who did it right. That's what's important. Because, I mean, you know my story, and we've spoken about it, but I got very sick from mold, and I have moved 16 times, which is hard for people to believe, but living in South Florida, it's really hard to find a place that does not have mold.
Very true.
And there were different people that I hired once mold was identified to fix the problem. And they'd all come in and charge me money. And they'd all come in and remove something. But they didn't seem to fix the problem. And what's interesting is one of those guys actually wrote the book on how to do mold remediation right. And it wasn't until I moved into a new home, found some water, called Kevin, that I realized Kevin is doing it by the book. The guy who wrote the book didn't do it that way, but Kevin did. And what I want to tell you is so many people can prevent themselves from getting sick from mold if they know what to do when it's identified. And that's the big if, because most people don't know what to do. And there are lots of contractors out there, lots of people out there, business owners, who will take advantage, knowingly or unknowingly, of the opportunity to make money from mold. But it doesn't mean they do the job right. So I thought it would be good for you guys to meet so Kevin can help coach people as to how to make the right moves once you find water or mold or suspect there's mold.
And by the way, Phil, this is one of the #1 problems we have. So many people have watched the show that I've done with you and some other mold shows, and we know that mold, metals, heavy metals, and hidden infections are these upstream sources that make people very, very sick. And we also know that you don't get better until you identify them. And mold is one of those things. It's the toughest thing to find. People suspect it, we can't find it, and then once they do, the remediation goes wrong, or people come back in the house after spending major money and they're more sick because they're that sensitive. Phil, that's how you ended up in how many homes?
16.
16 homes. So you know what, Phil, because you're pressed for time, Phil, so you're going to be with us here just for a short period of time. I want to kind of just turn it over to you to walk them through, our audience, our viewing audience, of what it really takes to remediate a home correctly, the things they need to look for, to do, and you can do that even with your own story. So I'm going to turn you over to Kevin.
Let me start by telling how they did it wrong, because you don't know until you see somebody doing it right?
Very good.
So one example was there was mold underneath the kitchen sink, underneath the cabinet. So, of course, they came in and they said, we're going to charge you X number of dollars, and X was a large number, and we're going to remove all of this, and then we're going to kind of rebuild the cabinet. And they did. They came in and took some sledgehammers and destroyed and carried stuff out, and what they were doing was sending everything that was inside that cabinet into the air. So, sure enough, they took away the identifiable mold, but there's this very insidious thing called a mold spore that moves around the house and contaminates the air. So even though the visible mold was removed, the problem from there got worse, and months later it was literally growing like fur out of the vents. So when they come in and they go, we've taken care of the problem, you want to believe them. I started getting sick, and I started to think it's in my head. They took out the mold. How could I be getting sick again? Well, now I understand why. So when I moved into this home, I had it inspected, and there was no mold. They did an air test, and they did some other type of test, a ERMI test is called, where they take a dust sample. They said there was no mold. The week I moved in, I was standing in a doorway, an interior doorway, and I felt water dripping on me, and I looked up, and that's when I said, you know what? I need help, but I'm not going to call the guy who I've called before because clearly he didn't help. So I went to Angie's list. That's how I found you.
Yes.
I went to Angie's list, and Kevin came up first, and I called him, and I started asking him questions, and he sounded like he answered everything correctly, and he came out, and I'll let you take it from there. So you came here, and
Yeah, I came here, and first he pointed out the area where there was water dripping on his shoulder, and the first thing to do is identify where the moisture source is coming from. In his case, it was a direct moisture source. It's coming from the upstairs level, but that's not the case in all scenarios. Sometimes it is humidity, humidity caused by lack of air conditioning, lack of insulation, the temperature differences between the inside of the wall cavities to the interior of the home. There's a few different reasons, but
so this was actually a leak coming from the upstairs toilet, coming through the
I'm glad Kevin pointed out, though, that it doesn't need to be a leak, because I see that, Kevin, what you said a lot is they don't put enough insulation or it's not insulated. It's just like when you have a glass of water, there's a temperature difference if it's hot outside, and that moisture forms on the outside. Where did it come from? Well, it came from the moisture in the air. That's what happens behind walls, and I see that a lot, Kevin.
Yeah, that happens a lot. Actually, another incident that I run into often with the temperature difference and condensation arising is, they say they use their air conditioner. I look at it, the air conditioner is set right. Supposedly, it's where, it's always like the setting that they showed me. It's not changed just before I come and enter the property. But the windows, if they have single pane windows and they sweat a lot in the morning, they wake up, all that humidity eventually evaporates into the interior air.
Absolutely.
And that adds humidity. So if it's not vented or exhausted right, then our humidity level will continue to rise.
And Kevin, I don't want to interrupt you because you're making a point, but I just recently had a patient who the mold, they found it was around all of their windows from the sweating window problem.
Sure.
It was running down in and around it. And they had 3 mold people come in and do 3 different tests, and all said, oh, it's fine, because they just did air tests. And finally someone looked and they found it. So.
Yeah, and eventually it could build up where it's coming off of that windowsill and then it's soaking, absorbing into the drywall where it's going to retain much longer. So it is an issue. Nowadays they do make the windows double pane, but I would recommend if you do see them sweating in the mornings, those mornings during the winter where you keep it warm inside and cold outside, use a towel, use a rag, but wipe it and soak up some of that moisture so it doesn't go into your air.
But here's an important point. I had the house mold tested, ERMI test and air test, and it came back clean.
Right.
When Kevin came in and identified the leak and saw where it was coming from, the water was coming, it was sort of running in a channel. It was a specific path, which was good because it didn't go everywhere, right?
Right.
But when he pulled away some of the wall, there was visible mold. So a question I have is, how does the house test clean if when you open up the wall, there's mold there?
Well, the air test that they take, there's a few different types of spore traps, but spore traps go for a certain range of square footage around where the actual sample is taken. But that is also hampered by the blueprints, where there's wall. So to be certain and thorough, I don't know exactly where they took them when you had the guy take the samples in the property, but you want one in each room because that's going to give you the most effective means of knowing whether or not you have an air quality problem, because the walls and everything can isolate some air in the area and not in the other. So it'll mix and flow, but it'll come in at a lower number. If they didn't take it around that general area, it might not pop up.
So this is an important point, is just because the mold test comes back clean doesn't mean you don't have mold. So Dr. Pompa, when you deal with sick people and they develop first respiratory symptoms and then neurological symptoms, and it sounds like mold, if they went and bought a little mold kit at Home Depot,
right,
that mold kit may not really identify the problem. Now, in my case, I was very upset when I felt water dripping on my shoulder. But in hindsight, I was really glad because it identified the problem and then we were able to fix it. But mold test is step one, and I would say if you're experiencing symptoms or if you smell mildew or something musty, you got to dig a little deeper, right?
Sure. If you have an odor, a lot of times it is mold. It's usually either a fungi, a bacteria, or a VOC. The mold testing, we'll bounce back to that real quick. It can help identify the ones that they sell in stores with the Petri dishes are more or less going to tell you what's in that natural environment, what's in that environment, whether it's naturally there or not. But it really won't tell you if you have an elevated mold problem because it's not a comparative sample. As the air samples are comparative, we have an outdoor one that represents the environment of the property. But the smell, you should definitely have it checked out because all of them are a problem. If it's bacteria, bacteria have odors, the fungi do, and the VOCs, which the formaldehyde is now in the media pretty big. But those have odors, and usually the first thing people assume is the mold, which probably the probability more of the time is that it is mold. But the VOCs, is common as well.
Yeah, exactly, and one of the things I want to point out is that we're tested. We get someone like Phil, Kevin, they become sensitive to the biotoxin that mold produces, and therefore we're not, he's not reacting to the mold spore like someone with an allergy. This is biotoxic illness. He's reacting to minute amounts of a biotoxin. So that's really the importance of containing this. When you're going to get to how to remediate, but the proper containment, because once those biotoxins start moving in the home, he's reacting to that, not the spore. Most tests are looking at the spore. Now, we have a new test that I just sent Phil, and we're going to do a future show on this. We're actually looking at the mycotoxin or the biotoxin in the person, and it's a newer test, and like I said, we're going to do a show on it and bring one of the gentlemen in. But that's the problem, Kevin, is that we're looking at minute amounts of a biotoxin making someone who's hypersensitive, in the home. So, testing can only get you so far. Hey, Phil, what do we always say? The best test is the canary in the coal mine, right? Meaning that if you feel better away from your house, you've got a problem, and you better bring in an expert like Kevin. If you get back in your house and you feel worse again, you better bring an expert in like Kevin because you've got a problem. But Kevin, okay, so I just wanted to state that there's no perfect test. The ERMI test, I think, is one of the best ones, Phil, the one that you did, where we're able to look at what's going on inside the house, and then we're able to look at like normal mold spores, what you're saying. In other words, there's mold, there's spores in the home, but what is normal and abnormal, and that's what these tests show.
Sure.
Then we found, as Kevin continued to inspect by the front door, Dr. Pompa, did you just get offended? He just ran away.
No, my dog just goes crazy at the door. This little dog is such a nuisance for Cell TV. I'm telling you, this is a dog. This is like the devil of Cell TV right here.
Mascot.
The mascot.
So he found by the door a little of the baseboard was peeling away, and he stripped that away and found some water intrusion there too, which again I was thankful for. So the big question I have is, can you fix it? Can you remediate it? And he said yes. Yeah. So we set a date. I think it might have been the next day, and I think I might have been out of town. And I gave you the key.
Yes.
So when I came back home, it was noisy in here.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. The machines, they do make some decibel levels. Windy and decibel levels.
So the first thing you did is you talk about what you did.
Yeah. Well, the first thing is to build a containment. Well, first of all, as you were saying, contractors go in it, for the viewers watching, they need to make sure it's a licensed remediator. Go ahead and check that. You can look up the licensing online on the Florida business website. A lot of GCs. The maintenance companies come in and they have their own maintenance men do it themselves, but they don't know what they're doing. Then you run into future problems. It starts polluting all your air quality.
Does every
Can you hear us?
Because most of our viewers are not in Florida necessarily, but does every
Okay. Well, regardless, they should check if their state has licensing and verify that they know what they're doing. Yeah. But the steps of it is also containment. Containment is the first step, building a containment, but that's only one part of it. That containment has to be pressurized. You want to make sure that the air is coming inwards and being filtered, but not going outwards, because there are times where there are quick breaches of that containment when you go in and out. And if it's pressurized negatively, then any air is coming inwards. And you can tell that, you can verify it by the way the bow of the plastic material that builds the containment bows, and it should be pressing inwards. So you build the containment, you pressurize it, and then you don't really go in there busting.
Just describe for people who don't know the containment. What does that What does that mean?
The containment is structuring walls. Usually it's framing through poles or furring strips, which are small wood strips, and then it's just simply plastic wrapped around, but it's all the way to the ceiling. It's tight. It's to the floor. It's tight.
Sealed, right? I mean, it's sealed, and then we create a negative there. So, like you said, the plastic will suck in, showing that the air is going out of the house, not in the house.
Right.
And it's got these massive air movers that, as I said, they're very noisy, but they're doing the job. You know, I don't know if you remember the movie E.T., where at the end, when they kind of captured E.T., they had him in this thing, and they're all wearing like the hazard. That's what it reminded me of, right? That's what he built in the house.
That's exactly what it is. So you need a containment, you need it pressurized, and you have to have air scrubbers running. As soon as you start to remove the drywall, baseboard, cabinets, whatever it is, building materials that's been moldy or water damaged, as soon as you start removing it, it's like pollen on a flower. You know, you hit that little flower, all the pollen goes up in the air. That flower wants to make sure it could have the highest probability to reproduce. So the mold is the same way. The fungi lets all the spores in the air as soon as you start to disturb it. So your air quality actually goes from bad to worse before it gets better. So you have to have a HEPA, we call them air scrubbers. It's an industrial size HEPA filter that filters out the spores. That's got to be running when the building materials are removed. But you can't go in there and take a sledgehammer and start knocking it all down, because you want to disturb it as least as possible. So you want to make precision cuts, try to feel out where your studs are and your furring strips, and be able to pop it out with as least disturbance as possible to that fungi. So it all plays a part in having a clean product at the end.
So then here's another mistake after that. Great. How do we kill the mold? How do we get rid of it? Because I see people make this mistake. And by the way, those watching, if you think perhaps you're sick from mold, then obviously we want to detect that first. But once they are sick from mold, they become chemically sensitive, and now we're killing it with chemicals, and then that becomes a new problem.
Right. Well, the chemical that you use.
Dog again.
Okay. I'm sure.
Now I have to let him out of the dog.
The chemical that you use is very important. A big mistake.
Actually, Dr. Pompa, we should tell you, has a bladder problem, so he very quickly runs, takes care of that.
Right. But the chemical that you use is very important. You need to use antimicrobial. A lot of homeowners, and I guess they hear it around, but they use bleach. They use a bleach water solution. And then what happens is the myotoxins inside the spore mix with the chemicals inside the Clorox, the bleach, the chlorine, and then you have different myotoxins that are produced. Using an antimicrobial is the way to go. Don't use anything but that for cleaning. First, remove everything that you can, but what you cannot, make sure it's bio-washed with, which is a HEPA vacuum first, and then the antimicrobial. But don't use a bleach water solution at all.
Yeah. Okay. So those are classic mistakes that most people make. Now, Phil, I have to ask you. So he remediated this. You got rid of the mold, and now, Kevin, I have to ask this question though. Let's say we see visible black mold, or whatever type of mold it is. Do you just kill it, or do you actually remove the mold and then kill it with the antimicrobial?
If it's on the interior of the wall, the best way to do. The majority of the time it's more within the cavity, but a lot of times you do see it on the interior where you have direct access to it. That area is presumed, if it's not surface mold, if it's not from humidity and it's thick and multiple types, it's more than likely eaten into the the drywall, and it's going to be in the cavity sides also. So the mold that you do see, you can do like we call it a self-containment directly on top of that to prevent that disturbance that I talked about when you remove the thing. So we can take a sheet of plastic, spray an adhesive around it, then put it right over it like a Band-Aid. Wow. So now when we open that up, we're going to disturb the mold inside the cavity some, and remember, we're inside a containment that's pressurized for that, but it's still keeping down the spore level that could have been released that is on our side and we have access to before we get into the cavity.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. Another mistake that I see often is, great, they do all this, and even if they do it right, but then they don't address the moisture problem. Phil's was simple. There was a leak. You traced it back. You fixed the leak. But if it's a basement, for example, that has positive water pressure where different storms come in, I mean, what are you doing to reroute the water from putting that pressure on the the foundation, or the humidity problems that you and I spoke about? So do you address that on every site? Because a lot of guys don't address that. I get very upset about that.
No, we do. Majority of the time, and I believe we did it here for the window incident. We had it open. We didn't go ahead with the rebuild right away. We left the containment up. We flooded the outside with the hose. Found out it was coming in a little corner of the window because it could have been soaked up from the bottom of the slab at grade level. It could have been coming in through the window, which it was. There's a few different options. There's a hose bib out there. If the line ran through there, it could have been from that. This one was a corner of the window. We flooded it, and we were able to use a thermal camera on the inside to see exactly where that leak was coming in through, and then seal the leak, and then retest it. So we want to test it, find the leak before we seal everything, and then test to see if it's not leaking. Always test and find a leak. That way you know where to look for after you do the sealing. Because if you just go ahead seal everywhere before you even flood the wall with the hose, then you're never gonna know if you certainly got the water.
We've had success with the thermal cameras, going around the basement drywall, and then because if you find the moisture, guess what? You found the mold, right? Am I right on that? It's like so.
If you solve the moisture.
Yeah. So those things can help find the moist areas, which is really important.
And it does. Just real quick, with that, they do find the moist areas, but what it's really detecting is temperature change.
Exactly.
The water areas are cooler than the surroundings, so it's able to find that. But it is used for the water detection.
When somebody's living in a home and they detect mold, of course they want to get rid of it quickly. And I think that makes people very vulnerable, because people can come in and do very quick work. And what Kevin is describing, it sounds like a lot of meticulous investigation and follow-up, and it is. I mean, it's a lot of work, but it's the right way to do it. And any other way is going to cause a future problem, almost guaranteed.
Yeah.
So it is a lot of work, and that's why I'm saying if somebody comes to you with a better price and says they can do it in less time, that's not a reason to make that connection. You got to make sure that you find somebody who's going to really take care of the problem. And here in South Florida, again, would you acknowledge there are lots of people who just don't do it the right way?
Oh, absolutely. Everybody's trying to save a dime. They get the low baller in there who could just get the job done real quick and move on, but he's already paid and gone before you realize you've even got more problems now.
Yeah, we on a recent episode of Health Seekers Radio, our radio show, we spoke about this, and I pulled up an article that was written by somebody very credible from a university who said mold is not a problem, right? So there are lots of remediators out there who will agree with that. They'll go, oh, no, it's just not a big deal. We just have to get it out. It's the black mold that's bad. Anything else is okay. We just have to clean it up. After Kevin finished the job, I was upstairs in the bedroom, and I noticed a little bit of moisture right around the vent, and I called him, and he came out the next day, right, and sealed that up too. And it reminds me of when you came out to my old house that became problematic. You walked in and you said attic air, right? As soon as you walked in, you said attic air. because when you have those little spaces, I'll let you answer it, but that's a red flag, and thankfully took care of it right away. It wasn't a problem, but had it been left there, it might have become one, right?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. What we did is we put a weather strip on the scuttle hole. For that don't know what a scuttle hole is, it's the board that you move over to the side so you can access the attic. And throughout the day, as the pressures change between positive and negative on the inside and outside pressures, pressure comes in through the scuttle holes and pressurizes the attic, and that will push down and go in the hole if there's a gap. So we use a weather strip to seal that, and also around the frame we put some extra caulking just to make sure that there's not a little gap that the air could escape through.
And I'll mention this too. He went out of his way to find non-VOC caulking, right?
Yes.
I mean, he understood that there's a lot more here than just a mold sensitivity. And I think this is why it's important. This is why I felt it important to bring Kevin on, because I think a lot of people who suffer with mold issues for a very long time suffer longer than they have to because they don't find the right solution to fix it in their house or office or wherever it was problematic.
Yeah. And Phil, you said it too, is that, if you have a mold issue and you became sick by mold or heavy metals, you end up with chemical sensitivity. So, Kevin, that's the other battle. So great, we fixed their mold problem, but now these people are very sensitive to VOCs, volatile organic compounds, and chemicals and perfumes, fragrances, new carpets, caulking, paint. So they come in with this remediation and they put new paint, new caulking, all these chemicals, and they're more sick. So now we don't know, is it the chemicals or is it because the contamination, the containment wasn't done right or something. So, this is a big deal. And Phil, I know you have somewhere to go, and if you have to jump off like I had to jump off to close the door for my dog, feel free. But I have to say, HVACs, Phil, that's one of the things that kept you from finding a good home. 16 homes. I don't know how many were moldy HVACs, but Kevin, I put that on you because we talked about this in one of the past shows too, especially in humid areas. The coil of the HVAC and mold builds up in HVAC. Like you said, they run the lines in attics, and if that air is escaping, you can get moisture just from the holes, not the non-sealed vents, right? And the coils. So talk about some of the HVACs, because I know people watching this, that could be their problem.
Yeah, and I'm going to let you do that, and I can't wait to hear your answer when I watch the recording, because I got to go pick my daughter up at school. All right, but I'm very glad I was able to connect you guys, so keep it going.
All right, thanks, Bill.
You can move to center.
All right, thanks, Phil. Yeah, with the HVACs, in the attics they all have humidity issues just for the lack of the HVAC, but the plumbing is up there, and then you get the warm air next to the cold air, and you get the condensation again. The drain line happens a lot. The cold lines, as well as the ductwork.
The drain line. Especially when those darn things are in the attic.
Yeah. And they will back up a lot too. One of the biggest problems we have is that drain line backing up. Algae building up on the inside, and then the coils are draining where they should be, but then the pan just overflows because it can't escape all the water. But so mold does come up in the attic, and then when the pressure changes, it'll push in the house if it has access. So we talked about the scuttle door last time, but it does also happen just around the AC vents. If you were to pull off the register where the AC blows through, we can't exactly see it, but we're sure there's one there. If you were to pull off that register, the two screws, there is a box inside. They call that the can.
Right.
And they need to, and this is another place a lot of people are complaining about finding mold, and I get a lot of calls, but that can, they need to cut in the drywall to have that line up exactly. And a lot of times it's cut a little big, which is very hard to get it exactly right. But then you have the warm air escaping right where the cold air is coming out also. So that's a bit, on top it's blowing on the metal. They're either usually plastic or metal registers. So it's blowing on the metal, cold on one side, warm on the other, very commonplace for the condensation, once again, the culprit, and it's going to grow mold. It's going to absorb in the drywall, and also the dust that accumulates on that vent over time has the organic material to feed the mold. As the mold needs water, which is either condensation or the direct water source, the leak, and it needs something organic. When it's on the metal, usually it's actually either the paint that it's on, if it's painted metal, has the organic material, or it's dust and buildup that it's feeding on, even though it looks like it's feeding on the metal. But then definitely the drywall has the organic material, and all baseboards and everything do as well. But also on the HVAC, thing we need to do is, if there's mold in the house, we remediate that area. But before that area is remediated, we need to assume that some of those that area has a concentration of spores, but we need to assume the spores also flew off elsewhere throughout the house. So they need to be addressed, and we can place some different air scrubbers around to grab those. But what about the ones in the ductwork?
That's right.
Yeah, that's an issue. That's a highway throughout the house. We do an antimicrobial fog that will shoot up through the coils and wait till it blows out the register. The whole house is empty. There's no pets, no humans in there. 4 hours is our time for the antimicrobial fog. But a lot of people and companies what they're stopping now is they're cleaning them with brushes. Brush goes up in there, and that practice is starting to stop. A lot of the big franchises are stopping that. There's lawsuits, and the people should be aware of it, because the brushes are going up there, and when they get to the first turn, they're tearing the line. A lot of this ductwork is old. They're tearing the lining of the ductwork, and then they're in a whole new world of problems, because it's sucking in. When it turns on, it's going to create a flow, a draw from inside that attic, so you get that moldy air, as well as the fiberglass. Now you have little pieces of fiberglass you're breathing in, which is another bad problem. And once again, the guy's already paid and down the road.
Yeah. No, we see these pitfalls all the time, and especially in humid areas like Florida. Most places on the East Coast, the HVAC's the culprit. Again, here's another tip that one of our experts on past shows gave is, keep your fan on, running all the time, instead of auto where it turns off, turns on, turns off. If you run it all the time, there's less chance of mold building up on the coil, because there's air blowing across it all the time.
Right.
Yeah. So no, I mean these are great tips, and it's what I want my viewers to understand is, if you have weird symptoms, maybe even just the inability to lose weight all of a sudden, or you gain weight all of a sudden, those are oftentimes mold exposures. You're more sensitive to light, joint pain, morning stiffness, just anxiety, can't sleep, lack of energy, obviously, but just weird and unexplainable symptoms. Mold is one of the typical culprits. So we're not talking about a mold allergy here. We're talking about biotoxic illness. And this is one of the things that I say are the big guys, the three amigos that make people really sick. Mold, metals, and hidden infections, Kevin. We look for these things in people's lives because they're so toxic that they shut down the detox pathways, in the body that naturally gets rid of all the toxins we're exposed to every day, day in, day out. Once these big toxins like mold, or the biotoxin from mold, starts affecting us, now it shuts down our detox pathways, and now we see the unexplainable illnesses. Now we see the sleep problems. Now we see the anxiety. In most people, Kevin, they're either chasing it with medications, one medication after another medication, and if they go in the alternative world, they start thinking, well, it's my adrenals. Well, yes, you're darn right, your adrenals are exhausted. Your thyroid gets wiped out. You start losing your hair with mold oftentimes. It triggers autoimmune conditions. But again, they're too far downstream, either taking medication or supplements for their thyroid or their adrenals, or, God forbid, they get put on autoimmune anti-drugs. The point is this, is that mold, just like heavy metals, is often the upstream cause of why we have all these symptoms, why the thyroid's not working, why the adrenals aren't working, why you're fatigued, why you can't lose weight, why you still have headaches and joint pain and morning stiffness. You've got to go upstream and get rid of the source, that's causing it.
Sure.
If it's your house, you've got to fix it correctly. That's the point we're making here today. If it's any type of exposure, you've got to get rid of the exposure. And then, Kevin, we have to get rid of it in the body correctly, which is a whole other topic, right, Meredith? We talk about true cellular detox, because most of the detox, and hey, Kevin, as you're talking about how people screw up the detox of the house, if you will, fixing the house, it's worse on our end. When it goes to detoxing the body, people are doing this 10-day cleanse, this cleanse, that cleanse, and it's just like what you're talking about. I mean, it's making things worse, not making things better. So the home has to be remediated. The body has to be remediated. So, Meredith, do you have any questions? Because you always have good ones.
Well, yeah. Hi, Kevin. I was thinking, I'm wondering too. Sometimes we talk so much about mold, but I'm wondering about types of mold and what we need to watch out for. I know that black mold is obviously a big problem, but can you speak to other types of mold? I mean, we eat mold on our foods, and that seems to be okay. So, can you kind of explain that a little bit more?
Well, what it comes down to is the types of mold that they label, they're the geniuses, and inside that genius, there's about 70,000 different types of geniuses. As far inside the genius, there's the species. So a lot of times when people say the names, the Stachybotrys, the Penicillium, the Aspergillus, the Cladosporum, they're thinking that's the species, but that's the genus, which is a larger class, and then inside the genus is the species. And then for each one, so there's 70,000 different geniuses throughout the world. Yeah. So you can't name them all, of course, but they have the species that some might have different toxins, some might just have allergens. The one that's really bad down here in my area, South Florida, is the Stachybotrys. That's the one the media labels as black mold. But there's actually many types of black mold. Right. Regardless, any type in concentration is not good. If your normal environment out there, you have 100 parts per cubic meter, which is pretty high for any type, and then inside I seen it at 30,000 types, and they didn't even know until you pull the test. They might not have the odor, but their body's absorbing this in concentration. So it doesn't really matter whether that one has a lot of toxicities or a lot of allergens. It's just the impact of the quantity. So it's both the impact of the quantity plus the toxins together. It's just not good to have an abnormal mold situation, especially if you're in the house there 8 hours a day, sleeping in it, cooking in it, watching TV in it. Your body's just assuming way too much of it. As we all know, too much of anything is not a good thing.
Yeah, because we often hear that, right, Meredith? Oh, there's mold everywhere. Well, you're right, there is mold everywhere, but certain mold, not every mold is created equal. I mean, a mold like Clostridium, Stachybotrys, Aspergillus, I mean, these molds frequently make people sick. And you're right, we call it amplified mold. Once it starts building up in a contained area like a home, this is where the trouble starts. And Kevin, I'm often asked this, well, look, I'm in the same home as my wife or, this person or my husband. Why am I not sick? First of all, I always say give it time, right? Everyone has genetically different detox pathways of getting rid of it, but some people are more genetically susceptible to these biotoxins than others. Yeah. So, I mean, there's all these factors, and here's the biggest one, really. It's how many other toxic exposures do you actually have in your life, meaning that the person sitting there with amalgam fillings giving off mercury into their brain, their bucket's already filled up to here. When they get exposed to mold, boom. I mean, they're sick very quickly, as opposed to the other person who, has gotten rid of a lot of their toxins, didn't bioaccumulate them. Their bucket's not as full. Maybe they genetically have a bigger bucket, or maybe their bucket wasn't as full. Either way, it'll take longer for them to react. So different genetic size buckets, how full is your bucket? Both of those will determine, how fast you get sick from mold. Mold is bad for everybody, toxic mold. Heavy metals, mercury, it's bad for everybody. But again, the size of the bucket genetically, and how filled is basically how reactive you become. And once that bucket starts overflowing, now we see all the unexplainable symptoms. Typically, people end up on medication for those symptoms, and typically, once they realize it's a toxic issue, then they detox incorrectly. So these are the issues, Kevin, I deal with every day. You know, people come to me.
You got a lot on your plate.
They come to me after they've been to, you know, every doctor, and typically they're detoxed wrong. They've been treated downstream with supplements as well as medications. You have to get upstream and you have to do it correctly, and you know that's what you're doing. So, well, I appreciate you coming on, and this is it's an important show, and I hope we really got people to understand how important it is to remediate correctly, stop the leak, stop the sources, and get rid of the mold correctly as well. So some major pitfalls.
Yeah, it is. If you don't do a proper remediation, it's not even worth doing it at all. You're not moving any steps forward. So make sure you have somebody who gets it done right. My name is Kevin Sutherland. I'm the owner of Accelerated Remediation. We work in Palm Beach and Broward County in Florida. You can see our website at www.moldar.com. Read our reviews on the Better Business Bureau and Angie's List. And you could always call if you have any questions or concerns. I'd be happy to hear them and try to help out.
I appreciate that. I do. I appreciate our viewers. I'm telling you, this was a very requested show because people, you know, they really want to know more about this remediation. We get emails all the time. So thanks for the wisdom. Thanks for giving your website, and thanks for being on. So appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks, Meredith.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Dr. Pompa. See you guys next week, and have a great weekend.